everyone. I wanted to do a video today on something called the window of tolerance. So the window of tolerance gives an overview of information, but I'm also going to throw a coping strategy in at the end of how you can sort of navigate your window of tolerance. So with the window of tolerance, it's the idea that due to what goes on in our central nervous system, we can have what I call activations. And we can have activations that bring us up or down and out of a regulated state of being. So if you sort of look at my handy little whiteboard here, the middle section here represents our window. And so in our window, we're typically in a regulated state of being, or our homeostasis, which is mind and body balance. And so ideally, we want to live most of our life in a regulated state, but I'm very aware that we live in a world today where that can be very difficult to do. However, in this regulated state, it doesn't mean that life is perfect and everything has to be good. We can feel difficult and uncomfortable emotions in this window, and we sort of have a better tolerance to navigate them, to be present with them, sometimes to even play with our difficult emotions. And so we're able to sort of engage with ourselves and other people most authentically when we're regulated. Now, some of you may identify with going into one state or both states, but basically what happens is when our central nervous system does not feel safe, it can either send us into hyperarousal, which is where we get a surge of activation or energy. We can start to feel overwhelmed, fearful. It can be hard to think clearly. This is where a lot of anxiety, panic, intrusive thoughts or images, irritability, anger exists. So it's basically a surge of energy. We go up into hyperarousal. We can also go down into hypoarousal, and this is where our heart rate sort of drops, our senses sort of shut down. People can feel numbness, discomfort, depression, sadness. Our loneliness is down here. We feel really disconnected and out of touch with people. We can feel spacey, dissociate, disconnect from reality. And some people in hypoarousal have a lot of negative thoughts or suicidal thinking. In hypoarousal, oftentimes people feel really lethargic. They have a hard time creating energy or motivation. So basically what happens is when we experience sort of a triggering event, I'll use when I get triggered making videos sometimes, and because I never would have imagined that I would be publicly putting videos out there if you would have asked me years ago. So oftentimes what happens is, and I'll sort of exaggerate a little bit for the sake of this, is when I sit down to do a video, because oftentimes I don't make a script or plan or rehearse, which is maybe a good or bad thing. What happens is I sit down and I start to talk, and then after maybe the first minute or 3 minutes, I start to leave my window and go into hyperarousal. I have a critical part in my mind that's like, Ashley, what are you talking about? What are you going on about? You're blabbling. Just stick to the point. And so I can hear this voice, and it kind of gives me a surge of anxiety. I feel a little sweaty, and I get nervous. And normally what happens, the videos aren't too long, thankfully, but sometimes I just sort of have this wisdom part that's you're okay, you're fine, you have good intentions, you know what you're talking about. And so more oftentimes than not, I just go back into my window and I'm okay. I would say now that I've done a few videos and I've sort of surrendered to the anxiety that comes, I actually stay pretty regulated, and I can have some ups and downs, some nervousness, some, I don't want to do this today. but I stay within my window now. And I think part of that was just noticing when it comes, being aware of, oh, like I've had anxiety for a while, so this is familiar to me. And so when I sort of notice it and acknowledge it and accept it as normal, I really stay within my window. If I would have considered this years ago, if someone would have said, Ashley, sit down and do a video on whatever you want today, I would have skyrocketed into hyperarousal, and then probably, having issues with confidence or self-doubt or insecurities. What would have happened is, instead of regulating after the video, I probably would have gone down into hypoarousal. And this is where self-doubt, sadness, depression, things like that can exist. Sometimes for some people that are really struggling, they can get stuck in these states for prolonged periods of time. And then over time, what ends up happening is we create this new window of tolerance. And the new window of tolerance, or the faux window of tolerance as it's listed here, I don't want to say it's a good nor bad thing. The benefit is that sometimes we can expand our window because we sort of come into acceptance that we carry things like anger, irritability, anxiety, which creates this hyperarousal faux window that we may sit in. Or sometimes we just are in awareness that we struggle with sadness, isolation, and depression. And so that means that we're not always at our best, but that our window is sort of a little bit larger. So this is sort of the window of tolerance, and the idea that we have peaks and then we have valleys. And the idea is that we want to learn enough about our emotional symptoms that we can start to regulate them. It's not an easy practice, but a practice is something that when we do it over and over again, it starts to get better. And so sort of skill-wise, here's where I introduce opposite action. I've talked about this before in a video, but I feel like it fits in very nicely here. And so you might be sitting there saying, oh, I totally go into hyperarousal. What do I do? So if you go into hyperarousal, opposite action is the idea that whatever form of energy we create, we want to do the opposite coping strategy to regulate ourselves. So if you are a person that goes up into hyperarousal, oftentimes you having a grounding activity, something that sort of brings the energy down, can be most helpful. This is gentle stretching, self-soothing, like a self-hug, or some people will rock, go for a walk, like connect with nature, plants, animals, stuffed animals, anything that just provides a little bit of and that can bring someone down into their window. If you are a person that identifies with hypoarousal, I have a hard time creating any sort of energy or motivation. The coping strategies need to be designed to bring energy into the system. This can also fall into like reaching out to someone, expressing gratitude. Gratitude practice gives us really feel-good chemicals. It can be going for a walk, exercising, listening to music, and just sort of dancing and shaking and moving around, because the body will start to produce the energy that will then bring you up into a state of regulation. So this is just a general overview of the window of tolerance. The idea is that the more sort of regulation we can promote, the deeper we can kind of connect with ourselves, understand some of our quirks and habits and what makes us tick. And so that's what I'm putting out there today. There's so much more I could talk about with this, but I think the general overview will be good for now. Okay,